I'm the Hermit. 1 month later. Most griffins were ambivalent towards ponies. They found them to be curiosities at best, squishy weaklings at worst. Some despised them. A few found them amusing in other ways. Galder was one such griffin. To the untrained eye, it might look as if every pony in Griffinstone was a part of some wealthy elite, but watch closely enough, and you'd begin to see those amongst them with frayed clothing, unwashed coats, and untreated ailments that screamed desperation. The kind of desperation that could make a pony do just about anything for a handful of coins. Most other griffins thought of Galder as a degenerate, and he was often inclined to agree. He couldn't remember the last time he'd earned honest coin, and didn't care to. He made his living however he saw fit, and didn't much care for the opinions of others. Stallions, mares, it didn't matter. To him, all ponies were the same, and he rarely had the opportunity to be choosy. Foals, on the other hand, were much easier to convince, usually more desperate, and usually willing to do more for less. Occasionally, he'd just snatch one, knowing full well that even if they had parents, they were unlikely to do anything about it. His eyes remained transfixed on one particular filly he'd seen wandering the streets of Griffinstone over the past few days. Unlike most, she made little to no effort to disguise her dire circumstances, even going so far as to beg for coins from strangers, usually earning nothing but harsh words from the guards and total disregard from every other creature. But today was his day to strike. He grew tired of listening to her pathetic begging. Rehearsing his pitch in his mind, he casually sauntered over to the filly and dropped a few coins into the bag she'd laid out in front of her. The filly stared up at him with a smile, innocent amber eyes brimming with gratitude.
Golly, thank you so much, sir.
Galder's smile spread, showing off row after row of cracked, yellow teeth.
Oh, think nothing of it. It just breaks my heart to see a young filly like yourself in such an awful position.
His ponish was perfect.
How long has it been since you've had a warm meal, little filly? A warm meal.
The filly scrunched up her eyes, as if trying to remember.
I don't know. Would you like one?
It was always so easy. He ran his eye down the filly's skin and bones frame.
That's a lovely amulet you've got there.
If it was genuine unicorn craft, it would fetch a nice price, no doubt.
You can have a shower too. Maybe even some more coin, if you come with me.
The filly didn't look sure, and it showed.
I don't think I should go away with strangers. Of course, where are my manners?
He extended a claw.
Galder. I'm a community manager. What's your name, little filly?
The filly hesitated, before reaching out and placing her hoof between his claw.
Sugar Blaze. Well, not strangers anymore, are we?
Galder raised an eyebrow, causing the filly to giggle at his exaggerated expression.
I guess not.
She smiled happily.
I'm really hungry, too. Is it far? Not at all. Come here.
Reaching out, he grabbed the filly in his claws and pulled her to her hooves, taking care not to scratch her as he did so.
That's better. Just a 5-minute walk. Don't forget your coins.
The filly knelt and picked the meager coin pouch up in her mouth, following silently behind Galder while he continued to wax lyrical about all the things he had in store for her. Privately, the cogs in his head were already beginning to turn, as he wondered how much amusement he might get out of this one. The last filly hadn't been much fun, but he had a good feeling about this one. It took them less than 3 minutes to arrive at Galder's apartment. Pushing the door wide open, he cheerfully gestured for the filly to enter, before silently following her. He turned and slid a bolt across the door, before turning the lock with a key he wore on a tight chain around his neck.
Now, let's talk about what you can do for me, little filly.
He turned around, but the filly was no longer there. Had she gone into the kitchen?
Little filly?
He took a step forward. The second he did so, he heard something spring out at him from the darkness, realizing far too late that he had been tricked. The filly, who had slunk behind the doorframe the second she'd entered the house, had seized the chain around his neck and was pulling against it with a strength he'd never imagined the scrawny little rat had possessed. As he felt the cold metal cut into his skin and crush against his windpipe, he began to panic and flail wildly, unable to scream for help. Crashing to the ground, he attempted to force her off by fluttering his wings aggressively, only for the filly to snap the bones within them with a well-aimed kick. The world began to slowly ebb red, then black, as his air was slowly cut off and he lost consciousness. Slumping forwards, he went limp. Cozy collapsed, panting, before quickly pulling herself to her hooves. She didn't know how long she had before Galder regained consciousness, and she didn't intend to be here when that happened. She wasted no time, rummaging through every shelf, every drawer, every hiding place that could have contained something of value. Slowly, her pouch began to fill with coins and other precious trinkets. As soon as she'd finished, she went into the kitchen and grabbed everything non-perishable, while eating as much of the fresh food as she could. She didn't feel anything she worked. Galder was filth, and deserved everything he was getting, and doubtless worse. As soon as she'd cleared the kitchen, she swept the house once more. Galder's bedroom contained a small metal box with a combination lock. When brute force failed, she rummaged through his bedside for the key, finding a few loose coins, but no key. Dragging the box to the stairs, she threw it down with as much force as she could muster, smiling with grim satisfaction as the brittle metal shattered open upon impact. From within the box, she retrieved a handful of coins and a golden pocket watch which looked like it might be worth as much as everything else she'd grabbed together. She was unlikely to get a good price for it, but it was certainly a nice surprise. Underneath it laid what looked like an oversized leather wallet. It looked worthless, but Cozy Glow's curiosity got the better of her. She turned it over, then flipped it open to find it was a booklet. More precisely, a photo album. The coin purse dropped to the floor. Almost on autopilot, she approached Galder, whose ragged breathing was intercut with painful whimpers, and pulled the chain until his breathing stopped. Cozy couldn't remember the last time she'd had a meal without meat. Griffins loved the stuff so much, they put it in almost everything. It was a sorry state of affairs when a can of beans or peas was a special treat to her, not to mention the ordeal she'd gone through to get them. But for now, she was content, happy, and had a full stomach, for the first time in over a week. Despite her hunger and dire condition, she had kept herself alert and well aware of her surroundings, or she probably wouldn't be alive right now. She had known all along Galder's intentions were anything but innocent, but she'd never guessed he'd been anywhere as bad as he was. It had taken a week of planning before she had been confident enough to strike. She'd had plenty of help, of course. Shoveling peas into her mouth in an attempt to forget, she began to wonder who she could have flowed all these trinkets on. Growth would usually give her a good deal, but it might be worth making the trip up to the equestrian district for some of the more expensive ones. Then again, carrying all that coin at one time might not be a good idea. Maybe she should stash a few of the more expensive items around the city. If Griffinstone had one thing in excess, it was hiding spots for ill-gotten gain. More than anything, she felt tired. A full stomach weighed her down, and she found herself not wanting to move from the small den she'd taken to in the alley aside a butcher's shop. Catching sight of her reflection in the broken fragment of a mirror she had propped next to her makeshift bed, she couldn't help but grimace. She looked like death. Her eyes were dark, sunk in circles, and her cheeks were hollow and sunken. Her amber mane was ragged and matted, sticking close to her scalp. Luster's charm clearly wasn't designed to hide the effects of exposure and malnutrition. She was almost unrecognizable from a month ago. She could remember, clear as day, the first time she'd slept rough in the Griffin Empire. The earliest rays of light shone through the myriad cracks lining the thin wooden walls of the barn, causing the filly within to grumble sleepily and roll over, screwing her eyes shut to try and block them out. Around her, chickens began to rise from their slumber and swan around their house, occasionally stopping to inspect the new arrival. Eventually, the pecking and clucking got to her. Angrily stumbling to her hooves, She lazily swung the hoof around, sending the birds scattering in a flurry of squawks and angry hissing. Blinking rapidly to try and wipe some of the dust from her eyes, she stumbled over to a nearby water trough and briefly shook her head and sighed to clear the last remnants of sleep away. She didn't want to think about last night, but it invaded her mind, weighing down her every thought and suffocating her entire mental process. Last night wasn't just a nightmare. It couldn't have been. She'd really died. No nightmare could ever have come close to matching the sheer terror and rage of having her life snuffed out so callously, with such cold, calculating indifference. What had happened? She waved a hoof in front of her face, then tapped it against the ground. Both seemed perfectly solid. The way the birds had scattered from her suggested she was very much alive and kicking. It made no sense. The last time she'd ever felt anything like this was when she was petrified, but she didn't want to think about that. Loading a few loose eggs into her saddlebags, Cozy slipped out of the barn door and hit the road before the griffin owner could discover her trespassing. She didn't know what happened to runaway fillies who stole in the Griffin Empire, and she didn't want to find out. She had no particular direction, no particular goal, no particular plan. She wanted to put as much distance between her and Discord as possible. Of course, beyond that, she had no idea. She already missed Equestria, but she had a nasty feeling she wouldn't be welcome home anytime soon. If Discord really had been acting on Twilight's orders, she would be in big trouble for running away. And what about Luster? Surely she wouldn't have agreed to anything like this. The Luster she knew would never, ever, have let Discord do that to her. Stamping the ground and shouting aloud in frustration, Cozy desperately racked her brains for what to do next. The whole world, in an instant, turned on its head. Something awful must have happened. She was sure of it. But she wasn't going to find out anything new eating dust up. If she wanted any new information, she'd have to go back to Griffinstone. Discord would be long gone by now, and she didn't know anywhere else in the Griffin Empire. As much as the place had disgusted her, traveling alone was 10 times worse. She would be safer in a city. Her stomach groaned in furious hunger. Retrieving an egg from her saddlebag, she grimaced, cracked it open against a rock, and swallowed its innards whole. Griffinstone loomed over the horizon like a bad memory, which it was. Cozy couldn't help but shudder as the first sight of the chaotic architecture brought back floods of bad memories. The pendant on her neck made her suddenly feel very self-conscious. Following her fears, she pressed on. All too soon, she found herself crossing the city limits. The stench of meat, smoke and industry was suffocating. Every injustice and cruelty she remembered had remained, only made starker by the shameless way they were conducted in broad daylight. To her relief, the guards not only let her be, they gave her a wide berth, perhaps assuming she was the filly of one of Griffinstone's wealthy elite. Many griffins were illiterate, so newspapers were hard to come by. There were the occasional street criers, squawking a language she couldn't name, let alone translate. After 20 minutes of getting nowhere, she changed tactics. Picking the first pony she saw, she trailed behind them, far enough so as not to be noticed, but close enough that she wouldn't lose them. The ponies seemed in a hurry to find themselves somewhere else. After dropping by a few shops and making some expensive-looking purchases, they set off in a fixed direction. Within a few minutes, Cozy Glow began to notice her surroundings change. There were fewer and fewer griffins, and more ponies. With few exceptions, they were all unicorns, and their cutie marks indicated they were particularly skilled in magic. The houses, shops, even the roads were markedly more attractive. A few cast inquiring glances her way. A night of sleeping rough had left her feeling, and no doubt looking, rough and disheveled, but none stopped to quiz her. The few guards she encountered were polite and courteous, and there wasn't a single slaver in sight. It reminded her of Equestria, which was no doubt exactly how its inhabitants wanted it. It took her a few more minutes to find a shop selling the Equestrian Times, no doubt imported at significant cost, based on the price tag. Unfolding a copy, she ran her eyes down the main storyline. Color. Moonlight established ruling council. Amdra. Gallus second in command. Today, the first signs of unity were seen in the seat of equestrian power after the shocking murder of Princess Twilight by her former protégé shook the nation. The captain of the Royal Guard, henceforth renamed the Equestrian Guard in honor of the fallen princess, today proclaimed the formation of a new council alongside the Admiral Gallus of the Western Fleet. Other members of this ruling council are understood to include General Sprint of the Aeon, 1. P. and Bearing Justice, Chief Justiciar of the First Court. The decision to convene a ruling council without the consent of a ruling monarch has stirred dissent within the nation, but it seems the decision has been met with decidedly more popularity than cynicism. The council claims it will commit itself to the selection of a new equestrian heir, but critics have already decried many decisions of the council that are seen as being contrary to the wishes of the last ruling equestrian sovereign, amongst which are the declaration of a state of emergency, the reintroduction of capital punishment, and the destruction of the petrified remains of Queen Chrysalis and Tyrk. The Changeling Kingdom, in particular, has decried the act as one of cold-blooded murder. Continued on page 3. Cozy turned the page so quickly she almost ripped the paper in two. Princess Twilight, who was assassinated for reasons unknown by her former pupil Luster Dawn, had no known heir when she passed, though the gifted unicorn Luster Dawn had been touted amongst some members of Canterlot as a potential future successor to the princess. Luster Dawn should be considered extremely dangerous, and should not be approached under any circumstances. She is known to be adept at a diverse array of magical disciplines. Her motives remain unknown. The reward for information or action leading to her successful capture or death was today raised to 5 million bits, as well as total amnesty for any prior crimes committed under equestrian jurisdiction. The infamous filly Cozy Glow is also considered a pony of interest to the equestrian authorities. Princess Twilight's 25-year reign was marked by an era of peace and prosperity for Equestria unlike any known. Rising from humble origins, she quickly defined herself as a magical prodigy under the close mentorship of Princess Celestia, and before attaining princesshood was instrumental in numerous events that defined equestrian history as we know it. In addition, Princess Twilight was one of the revered elements of harmony and the founder of the distinguished School of Friendship. All of Equestria joins the times in mourning the passing of our princess. The newspaper fell to the floor, landing gracefully in a puddle of mud. Cozy couldn't think. She didn't know what to think. Her whole world hadn't just turned upside down. It had flipped a cartwheel and blinked out of existence. Twilight was gone. Dead. Murdered. By Luster. Luster had killed Twilight. The words were right there, in black and white, but they didn't register with her. It was as absurd as reading an article proclaiming the sky to be green. Luster was wanted for murder. No, she was wanted for murder. She would never be free to return home, ever again. Heart pounding and breath labored, Cozy grasped the doorway of the shop for support. Her head was swimming, and for a moment she thought she was going to faint. She had never been so glad to be wearing her pendant in all her life. It was perhaps the one reason she wasn't back in a jail cell, or on a chopping block. As she staggered away, walking around in no particular direction, all of the puzzle pieces began to fall into place. Luster hadn't agreed to any of this. Had Discord been planning to murder her? Was that why Luster had? Was she coming for her? For the first time in days, a bubble of happiness began to swell up in Cozy's chest as the prospect of being reunited with Luster danced before her, pushing all the terror and uncertainty within her aside. Of course she would. Luster would know exactly where she was headed, and it was only a matter of time before she arrived in Griffinstone. Swallowing the rising lump of apprehension in her throat, Cozy glanced around. It had been a long time since she'd slept rough. In fact, it had been almost 5 years since she'd run away from the orphanage and slept rough in Ponyville for a week. She knew, deep down, that this didn't remotely compare, but she had no other choice. If she left the city, the Griffin Empire would simply swallow her up. If she returned to Equestria, she'd no doubt be put down just like the statue of Tyrick and Chrysalis had been. The statue. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. All those nightmares, those visions of Tyrick and Chrysalis, what she'd felt last night, felt so real because it was real. Chrysalis and Tyrick's bodies had been destroyed, and whatever fragment or shard or pieces of that lived in her had reacted just as expected. Did that mean they were gone? She hoped so. A month, and no sign of Luster. Was she really coming for her, or was it just a hopeless dream? Would Luster even recognize her like this? A sniveling little street rat living out of a box. She shook her head, dispelling the thoughts as soon as they arose. She couldn't afford to lose hope. Not when hope was all she had left. Well, except.
Good job, Cozy Glow. I agree. Excellent work. I'm almost proud.
The voices were ethereal, somehow simultaneously less and more than a whisper. She didn't know if they were real, or a figment of her imagination. At some point, she'd stopped caring. Before, she'd tried to ignore them, but then they started to scream, and she hated that.
Thanks.
She dropped her voice to a whisper, not wanting to be overheard talking to herself.
Couldn't have done it without your help. Think nothing of it.
Tyrick's smile grew wider, more pronounced.
All I did was point him out to you. Let's not forget my contribution, shall we?
Chrysalis snapped.
I was the one who suggested using the key on his neck against him. Really, how else could a little filly have overpowered a fully grown griffin? You've both been a huge help.
Cozy cut across the pair before they could resume arguing.
Sorry, you two are just a lot to get used to. I'm still not quite sure if you're real or not. Of course we are.
Chrysalis sounded more scandalized than upset.
We're all that's left. Believe me, this isn't my dream lifestyle either. Indeed,
Tyrick grumbled.
I was once a proud and mighty demon. Now look at me, reduced to a shadow, trapped inside a little filly. I mean, I'm not. It's not light. I'm not inside. Gah! I'm a joke. You can say that again.
Chrysalis did nothing to mask the mocking tone in her voice, causing Tyrick's already crimson skin to flush a deeper shade of red.
You're not in much of a better position yourself, Bug. How dare you? I am the queen of the changeling hive, and I will be respected.
Cozy closed her eyes and allowed the background argument to slowly burn out into a buzz. Her eyelids drooped. She was tired. So very tired.
I have to say, I just love what you've done with the place. Excellent taste, Your Highness.
Discord leaned over in a mock bow, waving his hand in the air in an exaggerated display of obeisance. Moonlight glanced upwards at Gallus, looking for some kind of reaction, but the stone-faced griffin gave nothing away. As Discord rose to full height, Gallus merely raised an eyebrow.
Are you here to entertain, or do we have business to discuss? Oh, so serious. I can see my days of running riot through this castle are at an end. Alas.
He swooned, draping a claw over his face.
I'll have to find my new home in a kingdom with a sense of humor, though there doesn't seem to be many of those these days.
Gallus's face tightened, and his eyes seemed to bulge with barely suppressed rage. He was normally a cool, collected leader, but the unadmitted knowledge that Discord could do whatever he pleased with little to no risk of retaliation was infuriating in a way that escaped definition. The fact that this beast's had waited so long to return was just the icing on the cake.
Where's Cozy Glow?
Discord's eyes barely flickered.
Dead. You have proof? Why, of course. I have her head in my pocket.
Moonlight snarled, losing what little was left of her patience.
Don't play games with us, Discord. You had the filly with you when you left Equestria. What happened to her? She's gone. Swallowed up by the Griffin Empire. Need I say more?
He shrugged.
I had intended to bring her back with me, but it's a moot point now. There's simply no way a teenage filly could survive on her own in that forsaken place. Besides, it looks to me like you have a lot more on your plate than a runaway foal.
His eyes gleamed with attentiveness.
The throne suits you, but you appear to be missing your crown.
Gallus stiffened.
You're not the first to make that accusation, Discord. I assure you, I am doing my best to find another alicorn suitable for the throne. Given we are aware of only 2 in existence, and given that those 2 happen to be the princess and crown princess of the Crystal Empire, there may be a considerable search ahead of us.
He pointed his claw in the Draconiquus's direction.
As for you, whatever services you provided to Princess Twilight will not be required under my administration. I don't ever want to see you in this palace again. Oh, really?
Discord inquired, voice as sweet as honey.
And pray tell me, good Admiral, how do you intend to enforce that little decision? Going to sick your toy soldiers on little old Discord?
Gallus's gaze hardened.
Not on you. Your wife will serve just the purpose. You can torture me all you like, but you can't ever bring dear old Fluttershy back.
The grin was gone from Discord's face, replaced by a mild, dispassionate stare. Gallus gripped the corners of Twilight's throne with such intensity, he was certain the tips of the armrests were about to snap off. Every heartbeat pounding in his chest could be his last, if he had miscalculated. Beside him, Moonlight began to slowly back away. Then, to his utmost relief, Discord visibly relaxed. A hateful expression began to creep its way onto his face, but he stayed his claw.
I understand, Admiral. I'll leave you to your fate. I'm sure it'll come to you, soon enough. Don't try to bluster with your soothsaying, Discord. Get out of my sight.
With an uncharacteristic plume of smoke, Discord vanished. The throne room slowly fell silent, but for the soft crackling noises of the burning torches that illuminated the columns lining the chamber, and the wind rushing through the shattered panes of glass, Gallus let out a deep sigh of relief.
I can't believe that worked.
His grip on the armrest tightened as he let out a low chuckle, that rose and pitched slowly until it sounded more like the mad giggling of a lunatic.
I just He just...
The giggling continued.
Admiral?
Moonlight cleared her throat as loudly as she could.
Were you not listening? Cozy is still missing.
Gallus stared back at her with wide eyes, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing.
Should I arrange a team of the Equestrian Guard to handle the situation? If we use an all-Griffin force, they could avoid attracting attention. Who cares?
Gallus slumped back into the throne, waving a dismissive claw in the air.
Discord was right. Cozy won't have lasted a week in that cesspit of a country. I grew up there. I should know.
He dug his claws into the armrest.
Finding Luster is more important. Every member of the guard we send after Cozy is one whose efforts could be better spent on finding the princess's murderer. Given the circumstances, it seems like lighter than ever that she had fled to the Griffin Empire. But we can't act until we are sure.
Glancing out the window at the shining moon, he sighed once more, rose to his claws, and stretched.
You're due to give the Council's daily report in less than an hour. I can't be there tonight. The Western Fleet is due to depart for another month, and it just wouldn't do for me not to be there. I want you to talk about the unreliability of Chaos Tricksters and how Equestria is stronger without renegades like Discord running the show. Understand? Of course, Admiral. Will you be gone overnight? Possibly longer. With Discord out of the way, there's less to worry about, even with the changelings beating their war drums. Have Fluttershy placed under house arrest. Tell her she's being assigned a permanent bodyguard, and don't take no for an answer. Do the same for the remaining elements of Harmony, so it doesn't look suspicious. Check whatever rejects you can spare at the others, but I want your best soldiers attached to Fluttershy. Utmost loyalty is paramount. If anything happens to me, or them, then she dies, no matter what. I'm sure we can devise a more permanent solution in time.
His eyes gleamed.
Speaking of sensitive circumstances, a delegation from the Crystal Empire is due to arrive in a day, in advance of Twilight's funeral. It's been delayed far too long already. Her brother and sister-in-law will be arriving with them.
He tapped a claw to his chin.
It's already taken this long to ensure Equestria is stable enough to hold such an evento. It's a delicate situation. When I spoke to the ambassador, I got the feeling he expected Cadence to size up for the throne. Evidently, with Flurry Heart now old enough to take the reins back home, he expects us to stand aside and let the first alicorn who saunters up to the palace take the crown. Make sure they understand that isn't happening. Yes, Admiral.
At least the pair of them agreed to that. Chancellor Moonlight stepped up to the podium. Unlike before, there were no more camera flashes. There was no more squabbling from the reporters. Any who tried were promptly ejected and stripped of their press credentials. Gallus had deemed both demeaning to the new administration's public image. Nor was she alone on the platform, flanked on each side by 5 ponies clad in the uniform of the Equestrian Garden. A few of them were actors, selected for their appearance. Moonlight coughed lightly into the microphone.
This is the Equestrian Grand Council's statement for the 5th of Solaris, on the first year of the Age of Vacancy.
She coughed again, then took a deep sip of water from a glass that had been waiting for her.
Today, the Council is pleased to announce it has dealt for the final time with the trickster god known as Discord. The Draconiquist's feeble attempt at threatening the nation of Equestria were met with nothing but fierce resilience and a steel will from the Council, and he was quickly sent fleeing from Canterlot with his tail between his legs. Equestria's citizens may rest easy, knowing another existential threat to Equestria has been eliminated.
The more she lied, the easier it became. She had always had a knack for public speaking, and she knew she was quickly becoming the public face of Gallus's administration. Soon, she would be irreplaceable.
Preparations continue for the funeral of our beloved Princess Twilight, mother of Equestria. A delegation from the Crystal Empire arrives tomorrow, amongst whom are members of the Crystal Royal household, to whom our princess was closely related. We will welcome these foreign visitors with open hooves, and strive to continue to build the strong bonds between our 2 separate nations that have defined our relationship since they were returned to us by none other than Princess Twilight herself. As I speak, Admiral Gallus is overseeing the launch of the Western Fleet on a month-long operation designed to project Equestria's naval power across the land, and showcase not just our commitment to world peace, but our preparedness for war should our national sovereignty be threatened, from without or within.
A few coughs. Around the room, various eyes swiveled in the direction of the foreign correspondents from the Changeling Kingdom. No creature said anything. They didn't have to.
The Western Fleet remains the core of the Equestrian Navy, and the most powerful seaborne force on the planet. I, along with all of Equestria, wish them luck and safety on their tour of duty. Finally, the search for Lester Dawn has an update.
All of a sudden, there was a rustling across the room as journalists scrabbled to grab quills and parchment, eagerly hanging on to her every word.
Before being expelled from our nation, Discord was interrogated by the Equestrian Guard, under the supervision of Admiral Gallus. Cozy Glow is dead.
The words rung across the room like thunder, shattering the mood like glass. None of the faces appeared sympathetic, but they weren't exactly jubilant either. Cozy Glow was an evil piece of work, but she had still been a filly. Those in attendance found it difficult to take any real pleasure in her demise. Moonlight sensed the dour mood and quickly changed track.
The search for Lester Dawn continues. The net continues to close around the traitor, and the hour of justice draws nearer every day.
Possibly the only complete lie she'd told all evening. Luster could be anywhere, and it was becoming increasingly clear to her own lieutenants that catching a pony with the remarkable skills of Luster Dawn would be an arduous and likely fruitless task, and a waste of valuable resources, but the public couldn't be allowed to know.
This concludes our daily brief. Long live Equestria!
In unison, every equestrian journalist in the crowd rose and began to clap and stomp their hooves. A small smile formed on Moonlight's face at the bewilderment in the foreign journalist's expressions. Long live Equestria, indeed. Author's notes. Another chapter for ye filthy animals, you will. End of chapter.